Welcome to part 2 of my Hermit Reborn playthrough. For those of you who have just started watching this series, I'll fill you in on the details quickly now. This isn't live commentary. What I decided to do instead was allow you, the viewer and or subscriber, to choose which way the direction of topics discussed go. And all you have to do is ask a question or leave a suggestion on a topic you would like me to discuss in the comments section below. Then, after reading through each of the comments left, I'll pick out the more popular ones, or the ones I believe could be more interesting to discuss, and address those in the next part of this series. With that covered, this is part 2, and there are quite a few comments I decided to address. So without further delay, I'll get right into it. The first question is, how long before the other ones are uploaded? You don't need to worry there. There isn't going to be a 4-month wait for another video like last time. I'll be aiming to upload at least a video a week on this playthrough. One thing that could be a factor on how long each upload takes is the number of comments with questions and suggestions that are left. Once a new part has been uploaded, I will be waiting a few days to allow enough time for plenty of comments to be left, and from there I'll work on editing and uploading the next video for this series. The second question is, where have you been? For the most part, working. Rent, bills, food, car insurance, car payments, as well as everything else that comes along for the ride, doesn't pay for itself. And unfortunately, I don't make close to enough on YouTube for me to consider taking it on as a full-time gig. I have seen some other uploaders with links to donate to them on PayPal, and I'll be completely honest about this. I have toyed with the notion, however, I'm not entirely sure how I'd feel about asking for, or leaving the option to donate available. I suppose it would make working less and putting more of my time into YouTube a much less risky venture. Question 3. What is this build, Hermit, about? Well, the original Hermit build I made is what inspired the Quality Pyromancer Let's Play, so it was eventually deleted to make room for a more optimized build. Not too long after, I recall reading bits and pieces on tarot cards, more specifically the Major Arcana. According to what I read on some sites, the mystical ninth trump Hermit is closely related to the moon. And that's when I decided that's what Hermit needs to be. So when you start to look at it like that, it should make more sense why Hermit is now a faith build who will eventually end up in the Darkmoon Blade Covenant, and not a Quality Pyromancer. There's more I could go into as far as the Major Arcana is concerned, and how that is relevant to Hermit, but if I did that, I would probably end up going too far into it, and end up having to cut out a few other questions. Question 4. How do you feel about going back to Dark Souls after playing Dark Souls 2? Also, what are the rules and or restrictions of this run? When I spent time doing a lot of no death, no bonfire runs, and variations of those runs, I did find that I got thrown a little by how much tighter the controls of the first game felt. Just like riding a bike though, you never really completely forget. It just takes a little bit of time to polish off that rust. The problem there though is, I've been going back and forth between making progress on no death, no bonfire runs in Dark Souls 2, then coming back to Dark Souls 1 to just play. So this build has no particular rules or restrictions, although I do believe even in new game I try to focus on using just one main weapon. The reason for that is because I came to realise that I often switch weapons to suit the situation. And while there's nothing wrong with doing that, it meant that with certain weapons I felt like I was hitting a wall. So instead of working on climbing that wall with the weapon I had, I was just going around it by using a different one. Best armor right there. Question 5. Do you find that Dark Souls 2 disappointed you? If yes, in what way and why? In some ways, yes, it did disappoint. The lack of good physical scaling was one of the main offenders for me when it came to Dark Souls 2. And as small as that may seem, I find that I am much less forgiving of mistakes made when they've already been made in the past. Look at Dark Souls 1. I believe it was in patch 105 when the nerfs and buffs that occurred to non-scaling elementals and pure physical respectively came about. And even then, pure physical only had a slight edge at that point with stat investment and scaling. It was in patch 106 when pure physical scaling was finally sitting securely at the top, as far as damage output goes. Enter Dark Souls 2, and elemental weapons without stat investment were outranking fully upgraded physical weapons with big stat investments. Soul memory was another, as I'm sure it is for a lot of other people. Creativity in builds was no longer as rewarding for me, as I found that any attempt to keep my build capped at level 125 was soon running into builds that were anywhere as high as a couple of hundred levels above my own. And in Dark Souls 2, a couple of hundred levels higher counts for a lot more than a couple of hundred levels higher in Dark Souls 1. Also, while Dark Souls 1 had methods of invasions that were similar, for example, forest hunters running into players hundreds of levels higher, there were other ways to be able to invade as well, and the level range limits mostly saw invaders or invadees within roughly a 20 level lower or upper limit. Poise was probably the one that really made no sense to me whatsoever. And the reason for that is because the poise damage numbers made absolutely no sense. Before I stopped playing online on Dark Souls 2, one of the last things I read up on was the poise break test that had been done. Now according to these tests, a certain poise value could withstand hits from certain poise damage weapons. And just by the way, even those numbers didn't add up. And the last line I read before I closed the wiki doc read something along the lines of, any two-handed strong attack will stagger even a max poise setup. I don't think I need to say any more on how little that actually makes sense, considering it was a tried and true formula in Dark Souls 1 with set figures that actually worked. An example of that: in Dark Souls 1, 53 poise will tank a two-handed normal attack from a weapon in the greatsword category. If your poise value was lower than 53, you got stun locked. If it was higher, your character shrugged it off and kept going. Question 6. What do you think people stayed to play Dark Souls instead of Dark Souls 2? Also, what kinds of people stayed, and what did they do? I can't really speak for others, but I think I have a pretty good idea why people stayed or went back to Dark Souls after Dark Souls 2. And that's because there's a certain something the first has that the second doesn't. If you can remember the first time you played through Dark Souls, fought your way through the depths, battled through Blighttown, and then found yourself back up in Firelink Shrine, and saw how well everything was connected, that seemingly massive world became a lot smaller, yet at the same time, a lot more impressive. That's not all. There's so much that's hidden away, and even to this day, a lot of people are still learning new things. While that may also be true to an extent with Dark Souls 2, the overall intensity of the second pales in comparison to what the first threw us into. Fighting the Taurus demon on a narrow bridge, only to later realise there's a tower that you can climb up onto. And if you wait too long to perform an attack, the Taurus demon scales the tower in a single jump, placing you in immediate danger once more. Stepping into Londo for the first time, taking in the beautiful scenery, only to fight your way through gargoyles, painting guardians, royal sentinels and silver knights, before finally stepping into that fog and finding Ornstein and Smough there waiting for you. But it doesn't end there. After finally killing either Ornstein or Smough, the other regains full health and new techs or abilities. How about working your way through New Londo Ruins, where ghosts and dark wraiths lurk around every corner, and when you finally do find the fog to the boss, you're surrounded in darkness as the Four Kings spawn at set intervals, moving fast and hitting hard. And when you finally defeat them, there's a sense of relief and achievement. And perhaps one of the most memorable for me was making my way through the Royal Wood, fighting off the denizens of Wallaceel and the giant stone guardians, all the while wondering what kind of boss was awaiting me next. Then after finally reaching that boss fog, I stepped through, only to be faced with the challenge of having to fight the NPC that I honestly did not want to fight, Artorias. After reading the descriptions littered throughout the game about Artorias, I knew he would have had to have been some kind of greatsword genius wielding badass, but to have to fight him, that came as a bit of a surprise. Now let's take a look at the bosses in Dark Souls 2. I guess Dark Lurker was a pretty awesome boss fight in terms of mechanics, but as for any real depth, no. The lack of any real build-up, whether it was through information delivered in item descriptions or NPC dialogue, made it so I didn't really feel anything other than having sweaty palms after that boss fight. Although it wasn't quite the direct answer you were probably looking for, I believe everything I just said would be as close as an accurate answer that I can give for your question. Question 7. Are you excited about Bloodborne, or do you think it will not be as good as the Souls series? At this point in time, I've been trying to avoid reading too much about Bloodborne. From what I have seen, however, I do think that under a new name, there shouldn't be the Souls expectations that were present for Dark Souls 2, which should allow for a lot more freedom in direction and development. To answer your question, at this point in time, I'm actually quite neutral on the idea of Bloodborne. Partly because I have avoided being exposed to too much information on it, and partly because if I do get excited about the game, and it doesn't end up meeting the level of quality that I expected, I'd be sorely disappointed. I will say though, if it manages to retain some similarities from Souls, while still branching out and delving into new ideas, then my prediction would be that Bloodborne is going to be one hell of a ride.
Thank you.
Question 8. For the next true Souls game, what would you like to see? That's an easy one for me to answer. Demon's Souls 2. In all honesty, I want to see a sequel to Demon's Souls. which actually goes into some sort of explanation of the broken archstone in the Nexus. I won't say any more for those who haven't played through Demon's Souls, as I'd rather not ruin the experience for them, but I will go into the mechanics. If it can pull off the tight controls and in-game mechanics of Dark Souls, the pace and atmosphere of Demon's Souls, and some of the more successfully executed ideas of Dark Souls 2, such as the dual wielding and power stancing, then I'd gladly pay more than recommended retail price to get my hands on that title. Question 9. What made you want to post videos in the first place? When I first started recording videos, they were mainly farming videos, tricks to overpower characters early, and basically just videos for the sole purpose of helping other people. Something I'll explain quickly about my overpowered in 10 minutes video is its purpose. Now, a lot of people think that ascending a weapon to fire +0 is a waste, that the Gravelord sword is better, that the Black Knight weapons will completely blow the rest of the game open and make everything easier. For those who think this, I have to tell you, I don't disagree. Not one bit. However, the purpose of overpowered in 10 minutes isn't to obtain the strongest weapon in the shortest amount of time. And even though I have done something similar in my game breaking in 25 minutes video, I still recommend that people trying to become better players should practice the route shown in overpowered in 10 minutes. This is because it was intended as more of an exercise that yielded a decent weapon after a successful run, not an easy run that rewarded you with a crutch to rely on through the game. And that right there is the difference. With overpowered in 10 minutes, you earn your weapon. With some of the other methods I mentioned, they're practically given to you, and with such minimal effort required, there's that chance that new players will rely on the power behind the weapon and never really learn how to use them in any given situation. Question 10. Any advice? Well, if it's your first time playing through the game completely, pay close attention, take your time, and if at first you don't succeed, prepare to die again. That pretty much wraps up all of the questions, and before I finish up with the commentary, there's one last order of business I want to address, and that's the New Game Plus 7 live commentary co-op playthrough that I'm currently going through with Chelsky Man. I'm sure most of you have seen him make more than a few appearances in some of my videos, most likely the Knights of the Noob Knight highlight series. Now, if you found that short series of videos funny, then I can almost guarantee you'll love the playthrough we're currently going through. I'll leave links in the description below for both the Knights of the Noob Knight and for the New Game Plus 7 co-op playthrough playlists. I highly recommend watching at least a couple of parts of the playthrough, as you'll get to hear the reactions as things are happening, the successes and failures that we have, which includes being wrecked by certain enemies, having poofling in contests with invaders, and much more. With all of that said, enjoy the rest of the video, and I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.